Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Max Rounds 30 podcast, where there is no overtime. As a heads up, we are about to do 2 back-to-back recordings for the podcast, so you're going to get 2 episodes this week. Let's go. I need some hype out of my co-hosts here, which are Jeffrey, M&M's
you get
more,
two for the price of one,
which is the price of also all of them because they're all free. And we also have Dat Paladin as well with me, and myself is Jacob Halfman, and we are all here today to talk about all this glorious North American news and a little bit of the international, because there's really not that much to talk about over here. So with that, we've got 30 minutes coming up on the clock, and let us go. All right, so our first topic for today's episode is going to be the IEM Katowice Play-ins. We have some interesting, it was interesting all around from North American teams. We're kind of recording this from the future, so we know some group stuff, but that's for the next episode. So let's start with Evil Geniuses and their glorious demise. If that's, I don't know. I'm losing my brain cells over here with every day I have to watch this team play. So does anyone else want to expand a little bit on Evil Geniuses?
I had no expectations with the bracket that they were given, Fnatic and Sprout. And I know some people will definitely say that, EG should probably be winning a little bit more, but I don't think that they'd ever be in the caliber of a situation where they'd beat either of these teams, just because Sprout on the outside of things could have beaten OG and we would have had an even more difficult bracket for EG. I'm not saying that these are excuses, because I still think that if you're an organization that has the amount of money and time and resources that are being poured into that organization, you should probably be getting results to back it up. And I think the main event would probably be a start. But I mean, you just look at the route. They would have had to potentially beat either Fnatic, OG, Sprout, or Spirit, which I don't think they would have done in any sense. But pretty mediocre. And I have very low expectations from this roster. I mean, Wiz is, I don't know, man. Like I think it's like a lateral move at best. I hope that's not the truth, and we do see improvement from him. But there is still work to be done with him, and I think it's time for Breezy to go. And I don't know who it's for, but I think it's his. I think they might see greener pastures, and they'll definitely have more cap space to buy somebody better if they let go of him.
You do ultimately feel that at some point, EG, do you have to sort of embrace the future of NA in the sense that you talk about sort of these like lateral upgrades, like Wiz is maybe a bit better than Cirque based on recent form. You talk about their performances though, and it's like OG, Sprout, and Fnatic are sort of the gatekeepers of the European scene. Like they're the people who keep the ruffians out of they keep the ruffians out of like ESL main stages. If you can't really get past them reliable or even put up, competitive matches, like that sort of tells you that sort of their upward trajectory isn't going very quick. And it sort of worries me when you think about the fact that they have Pro League, and now Pro League isn't that sort of, very slow plotting group stage format. Now they're not going to have as many chances to stay alive. It's like they go Pro League next. What do we see from them there? I'm not expecting a whole lot. Then they have Blast Showdown. They might make it through, but there's only 1 or 2 spots. When you think about it that way, in the same scene where you have Complexity, who's been playing quite well recently, you have Liquid, who's definitely better than them, and then you have, I believe, the next Blast. I think you have Blast Fall, and then it's the same situation there, where it's ultimately, I don't really think I have a whole lot of expectations for improvement from this team, especially when you keep Breezy around. You could look towards. I think EG's definitely have the perspective that, academy team is the way forward. So you have players that could definitely replace him just if you want to like go high speed, low cost, like George Snorts or even someone. I mean, I don't know, John G. Like I know the rules don't necessarily match, but you got to try. You got to keep trying something at this point.
George feels like the next best option.
I have a little bit of a counterpoint that I kind of want to get into. I think. Listen, we all just finished getting off the last episode of this, really starting to go, we're starting to be really worried about Complexity, right? Their team lineup, while those talents are more proven, um, experienced, I would say, not necessarily super similar issues, but they also had that issue where they were slow burning for a long time, and now suddenly, they've something clicked and they're starting to play really well. I'm not necessarily saying that EG is going to find the same thing, but I definitely think what EG as an organization needs to do is understand the marketing problem that they've created for themselves here, and that they've essentially created this expectations issue where, yeah, these players are now getting tier one experience. Yeah, they had like a breakout single best of three against Heroic, but God, you just really have to tamper your fan base's expectations if you're going to like stand by and support a team as they try to figure out their performance. I do think there are changes needed. I do think that for this team to really be able to thrive and succeed, personnel will have to change. I think maybe even uh, whoever Nealon's calling on this team, correct?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
like
I
maybe
don't think I don't think he's a problem.
I don't
I'll be
think
straight
Nealon
up.
is I don't think Nealon is a problem when it comes to that. I don't know if he's the thing I'm wondering is if he's going to be if he's calling for all of his players in a very effective way. And then that's something that you can only find out by trying other things. So I don't know. I think that this is a multitude of issues from EG as an organization repeatedly failing their players and failing their fans. Um, and just this team needs to likely, either one, look at practice changes, look at, the way change just changes. You got to look at changes. It might not necessarily mean roster, but like this is just not it, like
I do think it's very hard being an NA analyst and being an NA fan, especially with complexity in EG, because you always feel very like reactionary and almost like schizophrenic in your takes on these teams, where you're constantly bouncing between two extremes, where you're like they win a map, and you're like oh everything's fine, like there's the whiz cannons online, the hex machine is here, and but then they like lose, and then you're like blow it up, exile them to Cannibal Island, and it's like throw EG in a volcano.
it's a
So it's like very
classic.
hard to not be reactionary, especially because we're only in the second event of 2023. So I want to, do say like I'm not. I do think Breezy has, had his time on this team, but I do kind of want to see like what ultimately happens with the major qualifiers and ultimately the Paris major, because that will happen, after Pro League but before Blast. So while I said, earlier, it's like I need to see those sort of events. I don't know. It's so hard with this team because you want to like it and you want to give like nuanced opinions. Why would we make a podcast if we're not giving nuanced opinions? But they just go from such extremes of incompetence and then like glimmers of potential success. So it's very hard to like talk about this team in a very nuanced way, I feel sometimes.
I think Hext is being criminally misused on this team still. I think that it just feels like he's not being set up for success. We saw how he can perform um like a year ago almost. We've seen how this guy can play. It's not I just think that he's not being utilized correctly. I
I
just feel like
disagree.
this play I feel like this you can disagree, but this is my take. I think that as overall, I think that there are players on this team that are being utilized either incorrectly to how they best perform or just something structurally is not right. We'll see with the major. I think that that's your call. See where they end up post major, and kind of go from there. But that's my take on it. Anything else on EG?
I think that they don't. My issue is that if I have to give a comparison to the other teams in NA, um, complexity has promise, and even prior to them actually overcoming that hump, beating Ents, and we'll talk about it a little bit in shortly. But I don't think beyond the heroic win, I ever saw that kind of potential. That there's like either a mental blockade or there's just one series that they need to win to kind of kickstart their campaign. It hasn't felt like that in comparison at all, and that's my issue with complexity. It was very much like we don't really know the potential solution in this situation because we know that they can beat some of these top teams. They pushed FaZe, they pushed Navi, but they just needed one to go over the line, and clearly now, once that Ents hump has been overcome and they qualified for the main stage. mean, you just see these players look so much more revitalized. All these kind of discrepancies that we had about all of these players have kind of like seemingly evaporated in a lot of ways, and you can start to see that the system and the ideas and the map pool starts looking a little bit more healthier for complexity overall. That overall, I just think that that kind of promise feels tangible, not very unlike how it feels with EG.
Yeah, definitely. I think that actually takes us very nicely into the next, team in the play-in complexity. And I did, ultimately qualify by scraping in over ends. And that game, was pretty good. You do see like a lot of promise from complexity, and that's what everyone says over and over and over again. Beating a dead horse where the solutions to this team aren't very evident. You don't necessarily see who you cut, who you bring in. Um, I've always liked complexity, but they are, infinitely frustrating because you do think they could be doing better. But it is good to see them, make the play in, and we'll talk about their run in the main stage in the next episode, as we go through this chronologically. But I don't know, it's hard with complexity. Like they're almost the same sort of have the same sort of reactionary problem with EG where you want to pull for them, but when they keep, losing or being inconsistent, it's like how patient can you be with this roster, with this core ultimately?
I mean, you look at the win percentages. I think in comparison, it's like 12.1 or something like that for EG over the last 3 months. It's 59.1% for complexity, and that alone is just making me feel like I gotta just see it through and make sure that I don't jump ship fast enough. Which I mean, probably from the last episode, it would suggest that I was jumping ship. But I think that again, the game that they had against Navi, it felt like they were on the cusp. They should have honestly won all three maps if that was possible. Because they were in winning positions in all of them, and even against Ents, it looked like they were slipping at the tail end of that series again. But I don't know, something clicked. Hauser kind of turned it on, Grim as well, and they finally broke the curse on Inferno, and it was very poetic in a way because you look at their map pool, and Inferno was that gaping hole that they just could not find a way to plug. And after breaking that, they've looked comfortable on that map ever since, which is just astounding. I mean, Hauser can seemingly not make any mistakes on that map anymore, and they're pushing very competitive teams. So overall, I think just that one series win has completely shifted the dynamic with how I'd like to approach the conversation about complexity. And I think that we should be looking forward to kind of Hauser being more off the leash and him performing well alongside Grim. I think they're definitely the key talking points, of course, when it comes to complexity.
I also think, I mean, it's definitely like one of those cases where like I feel like North American Counter-Strike as a whole is very confidence based
Yeah,
performance.
100%.
So much so. And I think that's like a macro cultural thing. And I could probably go on a massive tangent about this, but I'm not going to because we're diving in on this already pretty heavily anyway. But I I did the second that they like look confident and they start a run, like I mean, to be fair, and this is stuff we'll probably cover in the next episode, they've been able to really show resilience in this tournament so far. And that's something that they've really struggled with in the past. So looking good to me. And I'll just hope that their run keeps on going.
Well, the infinite insanity of like NA, NA like rugged individualism, confidence, like discussion, you wanted to go on was the fact that that's been something people have always said about like Liquid for almost like 10 years now,
Hmm.
where it's like Liquid, Elige plays great until he gets sad and then he plays shit and then they lose. But oh, next event he's like Daps is giving him a big hug and now he's happy again and now he's good. And it's like always very much, it's always very driven by like how they're feeling outside of the server, which is kind of embarrassing, but what can you do?
Somebody gave Halzerk a keystone. Sorry, Bud Light. I know.
Oh, he was so uncomfortable. Was it Maui who was kept being like,
Yeah.
Say
say
the
the line,
line. Say the
say the
line.
line, damn it. He's like, I cannot say the line. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I will not use the word keystone.
All right, hold on. We're ruining our chronological timeline from episode to episode here. Let's let's
What do you
on
mean?
to
Nothing happened today.
Nothing happened
Cold,
today.
Cold haven't played their series in the main stage yet.
no. The fans have to understand that we do know what the future holds. This isn't like
We're actually on the
we don't have to pretend. Moving on to the last of the play, and I don't think we have a ton to say about this except for like the clown emoji Brazilian performance at IEM Katowice. So I
Yeah.
mean, what do you want to say about that? Let's start with MIBR.
I think the narrative regarding MIBR was one that was incorrect. I didn't necessarily. I think this is the first like real miss. I think from what was being created, and they touted Insania as having this incredible series, and he was an incredible player and he had an incredible debut. And I'm telling you, we've watched a lot of his ECL performances, and they've been average at best. And the kid's very aggressive. He's very willing to put out his energy, and that's very necessary for a team like MIBR. With the kind of, I mean, some of these players are pretty soft spoken in some situations, especially when the energy, like when the going gets tough. But I don't know, man. A 1.45 rating against Greyhound of all teams. I think, I think Maui said it best, where he was like, they're excited to be there for the bar and the free food, which that is kind of the level that I put Greyhound at in general. So you winning against them is like an expectation, not a kind of like wow, like oh my
They
god,
looked
MIBR did
really,
it,
If you
and then they
scrape
really
by,
scraped through
ropey
it.
on
no.
Anubis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think they let go of that big clutch against Liaz as well, which was abysmally played. And then against Fnatic, you can just clearly see that the caliber of team is just completely different. Like they are just not in any way, shape, or form at the level that MIBR could have at the heights of the end of EPL last season. And as of right now, this team is severely lacking in firepower. They're severely missing Cello and Joda's services, and I have zero expectations for them in the future.
So, MIBR. This is a line. This is a line graph of their performance. So I'm trying to figure out which hand I'm looking at while looking at my camera. This is what it's felt like over the last year.
Yeah.
Pretty much,
They
yeah.
have been so eternally disappointing. They went from wow, they're the gatekeepers of North America to why the heck is I don't know, like Vendetta or some other random ECL team just absolutely shit stomping them in a best of 3 in ECL or something. It's not okay.
The biggest thing for me is I commend them for trying new Brazilian talent, because
That is
Brazilian
true.
teams don't generally try new talent. I mean, look at Imperial, for example. So I don't. I mean, he needs more time, right? Like Insani needs more time. I don't necessarily want to judge him this early into the. If we can't judge Wiz, and it's not. It's even less fair to judge this person who has no experience. The big thing for me is I've been so disappointed by Henny on this team.
That is true.
Like, like I don't know if I'm just a boomer and I just don't get it, because I remember I feel like I'm stuck remembering the old Henny. I don't know if it's because Lucas isn't there, but he's never been the same for 3 or 4 years at this point. He used to be one of the best operas in the world. I would say in the top 10 of the operas in the world, and he hasn't been like that for years. And he's just very he's just a serviceable opera at this point. It's he's not a star player, and that's the most disappointing thing from it.
He's only been spinning his wheels for so long, and then I'm kind of like, okay, well, what is the move that would take them over the top? The problem is one, Brazilian operas is it's tough to just pick one out. I mean, I think if they had to, they'd probably have to go to their academy roster or something like that, because they don't. I don't. It looks like the org just doesn't have enough pushing power to get any of the big guns anymore. Obviously, Fluxo, 9Z, and 00 really have the brunt of everything, and I guess Imperial as well, where they can kind of just hand pick, the NQZs, the tries, the histories as well. I mean, every rung in the totem pole is just taken, and I think MIBR is just well, I guess this is all we have left,
There was a
which is
very
average.
interesting point given on the most recent episode of BTN, where they talked about talking to Lerpus, and they said the way he's running it is economically smart for MIBR, because they sell high, buy low, in the hopes that they can keep
Hmm.
basically pawning off players to Imperial, and they have these franchise spots, so it ultimately doesn't really, well, they have the Louvre spot, but they sell their blast spot, of course.
Right.
But it's almost like they're running the org in a way that they're hoping at some point they can just go buy a better team and sell this one off piecemeal. But until that point comes, they don't want to, because Immortals Gaming Club has fallen a long way from how it used to be. It's almost like they're just kind of holding the status quo in the hopes that eventually they find something that's super obvious they can spend money on. I don't know, theoretically, let's say Arctic qualifies to the major and they do really well, you could just buy that whole roster for 1.5 million and call it a day. But it's not gonna, it's not a joy. It's not fun to watch an organization just tread water.
So I 2 points on this. One, I think a lack of consistent tier 1 practice is definitely going to be part of the reason why, probably at least contributing to why Henny is starting to slowly degrade. It's
Degrade.
degrade. Yeah, I don't know. I just invented a word there. But the other part of this too is I think that this is a similar situation to EG in some sense, where your marketing as an organization is just not your messaging. You need to message this team as not like a tier one top AAA talent team. If this is the level that you want to compete at, and this is the level that you're okay with them competing at, yeah, maybe your goal is stickers with this team, or maybe it's to sell it, whatever. It's just like let's do this as a message to all orgs out there, all 5 people who listen to this podcast on a regular basis. Market your team to the expectations that you have, or that you like, that you're okay with for your team, because your fan base otherwise is going to go wild, and they're going to be like, well, why aren't you doing X? Why aren't you doing this? And it's going to hurt you. So, no.
I will say, like, to wrap it up, the sort of like polemic against MIBR that was said at the end of last year was made in Brazil was not at the Brazil major. And that's like kind of like the expectation of like this legendary brand that Brazilians are very, very sentimental towards the MIBR brand. And Immortals Gaming Club has done really nothing about that since they had Stewie 2K and Tarek like learning fucking Portuguese on there like years ago. Now we're really burning the candle here rapidly. I want to talk, real quickly about does anyone have anything to say about Pain? Is this kind of what we expected from them?
Yeah, I'm just really disappointed after their Melbourne performance,
Yep.
and they looked so exciting and their momentum was at an all-time high, but these youngsters are still struggling to get going at the tier 1 level, and it just sucks to see that Skulls and Zevi feel really uncomfortable at tier 1, even though I think they have a lot of potential. So I just have high hopes for them that moving forward they can find another shot. Obviously, we'll talk about it next episode, but they're going through their
Now,
own restructuring, and
what's the hoi polloi with Furia here? Because I think that's sort of we talked a lot about like the lower class Brazilian teams, but we haven't really talked about like the big fuck up at IEM Katowice, which was Furia bowing out to IHC. Which, with the power of hindsight and rewind the tape, you can say, oh, IHC are really good, but still, like, Furia were in the semifinals of the major months ago. So what do we think about Furia?
They vetoed like they were scared in that IHC series. Letting Anubis as the decider is something that I wouldn't have expected for them to do, especially when the cards are all in your hand as the overdog to kind of take it to wherever you feel most comfortable. And they removed Overpass, which was just absolutely crazy that they did. And maybe they had a little bit of confidence in their Anubis or whatnot, but I don't think you should ever be allowing the newest map into the pool to as your qualification status for Katowice. And you could see just how prepared IHC were in that map. They had everything down to a T, and you could just see as soon as they switched sides, Furia had very limited CT setups in general, and IHC had this just airtight game plan and how to just absolutely pressure drop over and over and over again. And this kid just couldn't handle it because he didn't have any resources to back him up. Caserado couldn't get involved, Yuri couldn't get involved, and they just picked them apart. And so it looked like a lack of preparation on the new map, which just continues to baffle me as to why they left that into the pool in the first place. And I think that they suffer the consequences
I think
because
a
of
lot
it.
of teams did this with Ancient too, where they do like the snazzy interview where they're like, yeah, we play Ancient, we have Ancient in the pool, or yeah, we play Anubis, and then they get
Watch
like their
some
back.
demos.
We watched some, yeah, we watched the nerd out there video, like they get their back blown out by like world number 65, and it's just like ultimately like teams that if you're a higher ranked team, you should never be floating a map you don't play, or you should never
Never.
like even or you're like, yeah, we'll play our permaban. We need some practice. Like, don't do that.
Don't do it in a
It's one
play-in.
of the big ESL events of the year. Why are you floating these maps against
It's just a lack of logic. It's just completely inexcusable. Well, it's just,
yeah,
what are you
it's
doing? Yeah,
disappointing.
it's just sad. So,
Now, with the time we have
yeah.
left, we have, talked about this longer. As a reminder, we are having a second episode coming out this week, as there's a lot to talk about. We're gonna move a bunch of roster moves up to the next episode, but we'll talk about some of sort of the smaller ones going on, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on them. So first things first, Vendetta have been making some roster changes. So They added Silas.
Silas.
Silas, that's the one. Silas. I'm sorry. I hyped myself up. To replace Pluto, who's gone on to ATK, and I want to dedicate some time to that. But what do you think about sort of the first part of that transaction?
I like Silas. I think it's definitely a hit in terms of raw firepower, and now I believe 60 is calling. If my
Well, that's
information is
funny
correct,
actually.
yeah.
The thing about that, I asked him like, who was calling
Mhm.
before you joined, and he basically just said like no one was calling. They were just pugging. So maybe that's like
Wow.
why they're slightly better than when they were at the end of last year because they have an
Mhm.
actual IGL.
That makes
Why
sense.
NA
Okay, yeah.
why
Lines
NA
up.
teams think they can just not have an IGL eludes me, but
Guys,
In 2023,
we're gonna
man.
default this round, guys.
hell yeah.
It sounds like our pugs where we're like somebody just calls out a play and they just do it. It just it's just baffling.
Right.
But I think the biggest plus of Vendetta was always the fact that like raw firepower wise they could blast a lot of people out of the server. And sadly, I don't think Silas can be that one-to-one replacement for Pluto. I think you could say what you want about Pluto as a player beyond mechanics, but mechanically he's very gifted. I'd like to say, and I don't think that he can. I don't think Silas can hold a candle to what Pluto's been able to provide for this team. And I think it was a key reason as to why they were shocking teams. But who am I to say?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, having an IGL, I think, is going to make more of a difference to your team. But again, I just have to lean towards agreement there. I mean, you
Yeah,
lose
I think I
Pluto.
largely agree.
That's a lot of
Yeah.
firepower. That's like you can only replace that with Pluto. So I mean,
hmm
or
I did hear something
some
interesting through
Elise
the
or something. I
grapevine
don't
though, and
know.
I want to touch base with you guys on it. Okay, so here's what I heard. So before they went with Silas, they were
Right.
looking originally at MOTM. What do you
Mm.
think about that? How's that?
Well, that would provide a lot of stability and it would provide a lot of experience that
Yeah,
I think this team is sorely lacking. Um, and I think this team would start to have to take things more seriously if MOTM came in because I think if MOTM came in, they would come with the expectation that they're trying to actually go deep in ECL playoffs and not just have a good time. Which I feel like that's what
feels
I mean.
mentally
That's the
compatible.
vibe I
My
Mental
get off.
my
compatibility. You know,
That's kind of
that's the
what I was
worry.
thinking. Yeah, I do think like we underrate Consi and Tender a little bit as good ECL level players who have evolved a lot over the year. The big
Yeah.
thing for me, I think the reason why I ultimately went with a lower, less pedigreed player is like you said, is that personality mix because having MOTM, Danny, and a bunch of inexperienced players all on one team together is a lot. Is a pretty like caustic mix. So I can kind of see why they didn't ultimately go with
Hmm.
him. And it could be that MOTM is looking for a paid opportunity. I don't know. I'm fairly positive about this team. I think they can still, show good things. It just kind of depends on how like their three less pedigree players kind of grow into dad's pants. Like, um, now we have with 2 minutes left. I want to mention one other thing that sort of came across the wire in the old NA news space. Detonate have made the change of adding a Mix to their coaching staff. He replaces Dave, who left with Florence when Florence bowed out. What do we think about Mix? I mean, obviously we love Mix, but what do we think about
Of
Mix as a
course.
coach?
Massive
I mean, I
upgrade.
think, yeah, it's definitely a massive upgrade, and it sucks that he's been out on the bench for so long because he's put in a lot of work on some really top teams, and I'm glad that he's come back to NA and he's like willing to put in the time with the lesser team. Like this team isn't necessarily the greatest in the world, and I don't think that everything's going to change overnight. But to me, it's like the reason why I like it is just it allows for some of these players to gather a lot of knowledge and experience. And if they want to kind of assimilate into other ECL teams, which will inevitably happen, that brings up the level of the region just wholeheartedly. And while I don't think Detonate is just going to automatically become a playoff contending team, I think that definitely some of these pieces can get better and potentially make other teams better down the road. This might not be the right five to kind of solve
I
everything,
mean,
though.
the other thing here too is that in ECL, good coaching and good IGLs are so hard to find at this
That is very
level
true.
that this is
Right.
super valuable for a team at this level, and that is what this region is missing developmentally. So having that great for Detonate.
I think too a big underrated part of this. It isn't necessarily that Mix is on Detonate that's important. It's that Mix is in the NA scene mixing it up again.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Because the
Yeah.
thing is, we we're young guys, we're young, youthful, vibrant guys, but the most ECL players are, 3 or 4 years younger than us at this point. So it's like a lot of them haven't really heard of
Old.
Mix because because he spent a lot of time in Europe, he spent time in Valorant. He's really sort of been out of the scene since, about 2019, 2020, which is a lifetime in NA post COVID years. So the fact that, he can maybe help detonate might get attention from like a team like, I don't know, let's say maybe Noun's the assistant coach or something, and that's sort of what I'm hoping for, is this helps elevate his profile in North America.
Hmm. I mean,
Yeah.
as long as he stays in North America, I think it's going to be good for us overall in this podcast. I mean, I think he's got a great mind for the game. He put out a couple of pieces with on his YouTube channel, and I think that alone kind of states that he's got what it takes. I mean, obviously his pedigree in Europe it also replicates it as such. So I have high hopes for him to stay within
Last
North
5
America.
seconds. Okay, EG blew it at CCT. Everybody laugh on 3. 1, 2, 3. Ha! All right, thank you. All right, that is it. That's 30 minutes. That is it for today's first episode of the Max 30 podcast. You can be sure to catch us on Twitter, on Spotify, on all the platforms, whatever. Just follow our links. You know where to find them. So if you made it here, you know where those links are. So thank you again for listening and or watching to the Max 30 podcast, and be sure to be on the lookout for the next episode, which should come out a day after this or so. We'll see. So I don't know, but we'll see you in a bit. Bye-bye.
Goodbye for now. See you in 24 hours.